All right. The AFC South. Let's start with the Houston Texans.
Yeah, we can. I was kind of going back and forth on this one. I kind of went more roster specific to see if they could add a defensive tackle before week one. I don't have their roster in front of me, but I believe that they lost a number of starters in free agency. So, there's a little bit of transition there. This is kind of a nitpick with this team who is kind of loaded up in a bunch of different areas, obviously traded for Stephon Diggs. I teetered with could they be the surprise team in the AFC? But that just seemed a little too much of a cop-out. To me, I think defensive tackle was probably their biggest weakness at this point. So I figured if they could find one in free agency from now until week one.
Yeah, I mean, you look at what they have. They know that was a weakness because it looks like they went out. I mean, they signed Danico Autry. We saw them add Danielle Hunter. We know they already have Will Anderson, and now they have Foley Fatukasi. I mean, as far as their top number one guys go, I feel like they have a pretty solid lineup. Maybe they do need to add some depth. But when you look at this roster, this is a pretty solid roster. And we're talking about a team that once again, they're not going to surprise anyone this year. And Tyler, I don't think it's crazy to think of them as one of the top teams in the AFC, finish maybe as a top 3 team in this conference. I think their biggest question mark might even be at running back, because you look at, obviously Joe Mixon was a big addition, but he's getting older. He looked like he was slowing down a little bit in his last year or two with the Bengals. And so if he can't be that kind of your go-to guy, yes, you still have Dameon Pierce, but I think that might be your biggest issue. But that's nitpicking. I don't think this team has a lot of issues. This roster's so stacked.
Right. It was tough to kind of pinpoint. I think if I had a do-over in terms of asking a question with the Texans, it would surround Stephon Diggs. Is he the player that really fell off at the end of last season with Josh Allen and the Bills? Or did he just need a new change of scenery and now he's going to be back to that, all-pro caliber talent at wide receiver for CJ Stroud? If he's the dude that was in the tail end of last year at Buffalo, well, then maybe things should be a little bit muted there.
I think it's pretty remarkable that the Texans, went 4-12 in Deshaun Watson's rookie year. He tore his ACL that season early on in the year. Won 11 games, won 10 games. Get out to a slow start. Fire Bill O'Brien, win 4 games, 3 games. I mean, this is a team that's terrible. Like bottom 5 in the NFL for 3 straight years. And suddenly you look at the roster and say, wow, is this one of the more complete teams in the entire AFC? I think for me, maybe the macro follow-up, and maybe it's an easy answer, yes, but the macro question I would want to ask is, because this team was 4-7 at one point last year, just like the Jaguars in 2023 or 2022, excuse me. The Jaguars were struggling, ripped off a bunch of wins, had the team above them crater, and they stole the division at the last second. I just sort of wonder, can the Texans validate the 2023 season? Can they follow up the 2023 season? Because that's hard to do, man. CJ Stroud had an all-time rookie year at quarterback. They didn't lose any of the coaches or the coordinators. You believe they got a good coaching staff there. Most of the roster stayed in place. It's just, I think, we thought the Jaguars like, well, how are the Jaguars going to lose this division? Like, how are the Jaguars not a top team in the AFC? And then last year happens. There's just a little more variance than we think sometimes. Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah, just asking the question of when do they extend Trevor Lawrence? I believe that they're going to. I don't think that they're not going to extend him at this point. But he's already even kind of said earlier this offseason, it would be nice to kind of already have it done, and is, at least publicly saying that, I don't know, we're talking, but it hasn't come to fruition yet. I wonder if that turns into a little bit of a training camp side story if this isn't executed by then.
This one's interesting for me because, I feel like we've spent a lot of time debating about whether you'd give Tua Tagovailoa an extension if you're the Dolphins and if you want to commit that kind of money. And we haven't really talked about Trevor Lawrence because I think people think it's just such an obvious decision. But look, should they extend him? Probably. But if he's trying to reset the market and trying to make above what Joe Burrow's making, I'm a little hesitant if I'm Jacksonville. I'm not ready to sign him up for $56 million a year when I look at the track record of what's happened in Jacksonville. Yes, they went to the playoffs in 2022, but he hasn't done anything that's really wowed me. I mean, he made some bad decisions last season. I think he had 14 interceptions. He didn't look like a guy who deserves to be the highest paid quarterback in the NFL. So I do wonder how these conversations are going. He feels like a guy that should maybe make 45 to 50 million, but I don't know that Trevor Lawrence is going to agree to that. So this is a fascinating situation brewing in Jacksonville, I think.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, I mean, Trevor Lawrence, the former number one overall pick, was before Caleb Williams. I think people have taken him, like, retroactively taken him out of this list because he hasn't been as good. But he was one of the generational talents. He was the first guy since Andrew Luck when he was drafted in 2021. I think people thought Joe Burrow was really, really good, but and a lot to go first overall, but I don't think he was considered a generational talent because he just, the way that he sort of showed up, like just sort of popped up on the scene with those after transferring from Ohio State to LSU. Like, Lawrence played in multiple national title games, was a high level quarterback at Clemson. I think it's I for whatever reason people really want to write him off. I think it's way too early to do that. You're talking about a guy who, I mean, I know we're sort of making excuses, but just 3 years in his career. One of those years, his rookie year, was with Urban Meyer, just an absolute train wreck of a season where the Jaguars won 3 games. They've been 9-8 the last 2 seasons. I think, or I guess he went 8-8 technically last year, but the Jaguars went 9-8. The decline in the stats a little disappointing, but there's a lot of hype last year for Trevor Lawrence. I think he could sort of be a under the radar bounce back candidate who could sneak in the MVP discussion if this team takes some kind of step forward. I don't know that they're going to do that. But I think if I can get Trevor Lawrence for under Joe Burrow money because Kyler Murray's making $46 million, then I'd probably go ahead and do it. Otherwise, if he has a huge year.
Okay, Brinson, what about over Joe Burrow money? Are you going to give him $56 million a year?
I think I'd rather let this season play out, and you're still going to give him the same amount of money. I mean, who's going to? I mean, I don't think anybody's going to reset the market in that particular case. The Indianapolis Colts.
Yeah, for me, it's their backfield. I mean, you mentioned it with another team earlier, Breach, but like for me, I know you have Jonathan Taylor. He hasn't been 100% healthy over the last couple of years. You lose Zach Moss in free agency to the Bengals this offseason, and there's really not a lot of guys beyond that. I know that Anthony Richardson is going to take a lot of those rushing opportunities, but I think what we saw last year was that maybe you shouldn't just throw him to the wolves as much as you did because he got hurt and he wasn't able to finish the season. And so I wonder if you don't have if you have Jonathan Taylor, who's over the last few years not been this Iron Man, and you have a quarterback that you just invested a top 5 pick in who struggled to stay healthy because of his rushing abilities, I almost would like them to bolster that backfield even more.
Yeah, I think the Colts situation is interesting because, as you said, we don't know that Jonathan Taylor can stay healthy, and you're kind of putting all your eggs in the Taylor basket. And if he doesn't stay healthy, or if he doesn't look as good as he did a couple seasons ago, you're in a situation where now Anthony Richardson does have to carry the load, and we don't know that if he can stay healthy. If he's taking hits, if you expect him to run the ball more than a normal quarterback, and he's taking hits left and right, you don't know what's going to happen. And so he's still pretty unproven considering he only played a couple games last year. So and now you have also your backup quarterback, Joe Flacco. If something happens to Anthony Richardson, Joe Flacco's not running the ball. So now you're going to be relying on your ground game. So yeah, it is interesting to see what they're going to do in the backfield. And maybe they do need to add a more experienced veteran running back before the season starts. 2
quick things on it. One, Trey Sermon breakout season. I think so. Finally, 4 years into it. And 2, if you're going to sign Michael Pittman anyway, you should have gotten that deal done ahead of time and franchise tag Zach Moss for like a nothing burger running back deal. Would have been a little bit cheaper to pull that off. Tennessee Titans.
It all around Will Levis, and can he be capable enough to be the full-time starter? Is it all warranted for them to not look at quarterbacks? I mean, you got to remember, they had a top 10 pick. Like, they could have very easily been in the conversation this offseason around the NFL draft to possibly one of the teams that move up or draft, J.J. McCarthy or something like that. They decided not to. They stay with Will Levis and admittedly do a great job at surrounding him with talent. I mean, you bring in, you help along the offensive line with J.C. Latham. You get Calvin Ridley in free agency along with Tony Pollard out of the backfield. Like, I like what they've done. It now just rests on whether or not Levis can actually be the guy.
Yeah, and I think because this is the question, you're actually thrilled if you're Brian Callahan taking this job because there's no pressure on you in year one. If Will Levis struggles or the offense struggles, it's the blame's going to go on Will Levis, and it's all right. Next year we're going to go find a quarterback. But if he looks good, the coaching staff is going to get a lot of credit for this offense being good and Will Levis being a good quarterback. But yeah, that's absolutely what they have to do. And the other thing is, if he's bad, they'll likely get another top 10 pick, and they'll be in a spot where they can get a quarterback. And look, they're building this team around him. You have DeAndre Hopkins, Calvin Ridley, Treylon Burks. You have a pretty solid 1-2-3 punch at receiver. I would be a little concerned about the running backs because we saw Tony Pollard in Dallas. He wasn't great when they decided to make him the bell cow there. And, Tajay Spears is fast. He's good. I'm not sure how many hits he's going to take. He's not going to be a guy that's getting 200 carries. So I think, and Pollard and Spears almost seem like similar players. So you definitely don't have a Derrick Henry type player. But yeah, so I'm not sure about their backfield, but yeah, all the pressure's on Will Levis, and the Titans have put him in a spot where he should be able to succeed, or at least show if he can be good.
Should be a lot better. I think, yeah, I mean, it's a no-brainer question. Pete Prisco's been on a little bit of a heater with quarterbacks in the last 5 years, like Josh Allen, Justin Herbert. He nailed it. And so I'm a little worried because he loves Will Levis. I think you can see some of it from him. It's going to say a lot about Brian Callahan as a coach when we see what the Titans do with Levis this year.